I'm David Vaughn of O-Scale Central. O-Scale 2-Rail, models built to 1 to 48 scale and running on 2-rail track, is the best kept secret in model railroading. We're pleased to team with Jim Kello to introduce O-Scale 2-Rail to NewTrack's viewers. O-Scale 2-Rail is for modelers. At twice the scale and 8 times the mass of HO, O-Scale's heft and ease of modeling create an outstanding model railroading experience. O-Scale 2-Rail modeling is as varied as railroading itself. Modern era, transition or old time, standard gauge or narrow. A wide variety of models is available at affordable prices. There is a supportive community and lots of shows, clubs, and events. You can explore O-Scale 2-Rail by going to our website, oscalecentral.com. You will find information about the scale and how to get started, as well as a free, searchable, scale-wide product and service guide and listings of coming O-Scale events. You will also find information about how to join O-Scale Central. We promote O-Scale 2-Rail and support modelers in the scale. When your eyes are going bifocular, when you need fresh challenges, keep O-Scale 2-Rail in mind. Check us out, oscalecentral.com. Thanks.
I wrote an article about O-Scale Central in the last issue of O-Scale Resource Magazine. Interestingly, I got 0 comments on that article. Nobody sent me a single comment about anything that I said about that organization in that article. And that article was probably about 6-7 pages. I do think it's an organization that a lot of us in O-Scale need to at least look into to see if this is something that we want to become involved with, because I do think that the O-Scale hobby needs a lot of support right now, and this is the only organization out there that I'm aware of that can provide that support. Now, I want to introduce David Schultz, who is the host for this segment of our show. David, welcome.
All right. We'll take that off mute. Well, I've been kind of shy on my appearances on this show. I've been kind of busy between the museum and living on a lake. Been a little nuts. So tonight is kind of a off the cuff kind of thing. I had to come up with this real quick, so it might be short, but tonight I'm going to talk about the Proto 48 part, which is what I do in O-Scale. Seems to be catching on. There's I was talking to a recent manufacturer, and he was saying that half of his sales now are Proto 48 sales, which kind of caught me off guard.
David, excuse me a second. Pat, could you spotlight him, please?
He spotlighted automatically, Jim.
Okay. All
Go
right.
ahead.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I'll continue on.
Okay.
Whether I'm spotlighted or not, I'm not used to being in the spotlight anyway. So anyway, I was kind of surprised that there's that many Proto 48 modelers out there. So I'm happy about that. I have nothing against 5-foot gauge. I call it Russian gauge just to kind of tease the guys, but I really enjoy it. I started off probably in the early 80s, mid 80s. There was an article in Model Railroader, I think back then, on this new Proto 48 movement. And at the time I had very little equipment. So I thought, well, in for a penny, in for a pound. So I jumped in, and I've learned a lot about Proto 48. One of the things that I was worried about was that the tolerances would be so tight that I didn't know if I was going to be capable of keeping that kind of a tolerance. But I learned early on that the tolerances in Proto 48 are the same as the tolerances in HO. And I thought, well, if those people can handle a rail and run fine scale wheels, there should be no reason an O-scaler can't do it. So anyway, I figured, okay, the first thing I'm going to do is I'll make perfectly flat track so that we don't have to worry about it. And so I started building my first layout back probably like 88. And I could not keep stuff on the rail. It was constantly derailing on me. And I thought, okay, what am I doing wrong? Well, if you look at because you look at prototype track, it's anything but flat and level except on the main lines. Your branch lines, your sidings, all of that, you see the rail weaving in and out and bad joints a little bit, and yet the cars don't come off the rail. Well, part of it is they've got weight on their side. They, the cars just weigh so much that the flanges and the wheels are going to stay in contact with the rail. Well, that was kind of the secret of my derailments, was you've got to have absolute contact with the rail at all times with your wheels, with a flange of only 25 thousandths. And people who work in plastic and stuff know 25 thousand is not a lot of space. Well, if you have any wheel lift at all, you're gonna pick a switch, you're gonna climb over the ball of the rail, and you're gonna be on the ground. So one of the things I learned is that you've got to make sure, if you've got, like my passenger car trucks, the journal boxes they're free floating in the pedestals, and they've got springs on them. But the problem was always that the springs are far too stiff. So there was no movement. You'd put it under the car, and if you'd move it, the wheels would actually lift up over any little bit of a deviation in the joint. And even if there wasn't a deviation, if the trucks weren't absolutely perfectly built, you'd have one wheel that would raise up as you go around a corner, and on the ground it would go. So the first thing you have to do is make sure that your pedestals and your journal boxes are free floating in there. A lot of the new trucks, like Katie is coming out with, they don't have any springs in them, but they're nicely equalized. So they're real loose. The wheels are able to drop into bad joints, come back up. That's the whole secret about this. On my Chemtron trucks, the passenger car trucks, I've built these, and I found some springs at, I think it's Jones Springs out of Kentucky. And these are real soft. You can see that the wheels move in and out of there real nicely. It's kind of hard to see on this screen, I suppose, but these will support 1 pound of weight. So my passenger cars come in around 2 pounds. You put them on here and you watch the springs compress. You push that car around, and it's fascinating to watch the wheels actually drop down into a low spot and rise back up without leaving the rail. You've just got that constant contact that's so important in keeping things on track. I know that there's one outfit that made a locomotive, and they had no springs in the trucks at all. The trucks were literally bottomed out all the time. And he said he's had no trouble with derailments at all. Well, without the springs in there, yeah, it just acts like a truck that's fully equalized. They floated in and out and didn't seem to be a problem, but I can't stand the look personally. So I will find some springs for that locomotive and put them in there. Another thing that I found worked really well, like in the Athearn trucks that I buy for O-scale, if the springs are way too stiff, you can start trimming some of the spring off of there. I'll take a moto tool and just start cutting the spring and making it shorter and shorter until the bolster just finally stops topping out. Because that's the problem with a lot of them. The springs press the bolter right up against the top of the truck, and then they have no give. Well, if you start shortening that spring up a little bit and put it in there, all of a sudden the bolster will no longer be under pressure on the top of its movement. It'll actually drop down just a little bit, and now you've got a free floating style truck that will bend and give and work the way the prototypes work. So these are just some of the few things I've learned about Proto 48. I'll actually probably send in some photographs of the layout I've started building. It's track on something anyway, as what was stated. So I will send in some pictures. I've been using sheetrock. It came recommended to me by another modeler, and I thought it was such an odd material to use to mount track on. But amazingly enough, I'll put down the plywood, and then I'll put down like 5/8 sheetrock, and I hand lay my track on that. And the sheetrock is very stable. It doesn't seem to grow much or shrink in humid weather or in hot weather or in cold weather. It's very stable material, and surprisingly, I can drive spikes into it, and it holds the spikes pretty well. It's kind of amazing because, like you say, you don't think of sheetrock as being a good material to use for building a lab. But I'll send some pictures in, Chris, and we can take a look at what I've got built anyway. But anyway, that's kind of what I threw together tonight, Jim. It's what I've got for this evening on O-scale. I will try to do better for next month in November and see if we can come up with a little more in-depth subject.
Anybody got any questions for David? Anybody modeling that kind of scale?
Am I a loner? Am I all alone? Nobody else does Proto 48? I mean, the same concept is true. I mean, in the 5 foot scale, the flanges are much larger. So you can get away with some wheel lift and not have a problem. And in Lionel, you can, the pizza cutters, you can really have some bad track and they don't seem to have a problem tracking. But when you start going into the fine scale stuff, you can have a lot of issues on your track. So,
David, what rail are you using?
well, I'm using 138 for my main lines. The other thing I really enjoyed about the Pro 48 thing is I saw a guy build a layout and his sidings were code 70 rail. And even with the regular 5 foot O scale, you can't run on 70-pound rail. The flanges hit the spikes. Well, I love the fact that you can lay code 70 rail and still run O scale trains on that rail. Now my sidings and some of the yard are code 125, and then I've got a grain elevator that I'll show in the October show here that I'm using code 100 HO rail, which comes out to around 85-pound O scale, and I'll be laying that in the elevator. And but I got to get some HO components here. It's kind of taboo around here to have HO stuff, so I got to keep that under the hush hush. But we'll sneak some in here.
David, I think a lot of the reason a lot of people don't model in this scale is they're scared of it. They frankly just they're concerned that it's so difficult to get the track right.
That was kind of my thought too when I first entered this. Was, with the gauges available, it's not too difficult. But if they can handle a rail in HO, you can certainly do it in O scale. And I've built some diamonds, I've built turnouts, I've done all this with great success. It's not as difficult once you warm up to it. It's not as difficult as it might seem, but yeah, it is kind of a boogeyman. You're like I say, when I first entered, I was afraid that I was not going to be able to live up to that standard there, because the people they were showing in this article are absolute craftsmen at what they're doing. And I thought, I don't know that I can model to that level, but amazingly enough, it's not as bad as one might think.
I've got a question, David.
Yeah, lay it on me.
P48 is a real scale rivet counting type of modeling. How do you adapt your curves so they're a P48 type curve? Is there such a thing as that? In other words, you can't possibly have a real railroad curve on a model. Is that one of the liberties that you take, is to reduce the curves?
I'm not having that problem. I've got a 36-inch curve on my layout, and it's real tight. Now, my layout's going to be limited to 40 and 50-foot cars. I'm not going to be able to run passenger cars around something like that. And it's not that I couldn't. I don't like the look of a 90-foot car going around that sharp a curve. It's just unprototypical looking. But most of my curves are 60-inch. They're absolutely the same as what regular O scale uses. It just, the gauge is brought in a little bit. And I think it's like 3/16 of an inch or less is all you're moving that rail in. But it's those fine scale wheels that really change the look of like your cars, your locomotives. To have a prototype flange on them it just changes the whole look. And then a wheel that's only 115 thousandths, little less than 1/8 of an inch wide, really makes stuff look good. But no, as far as the curves are going, I'm running the same curves as anyone else runs.
Also, your switches. Are you doing like 10s and 12s and things like that?
You certainly can. I'm using number 5s on most of it and number 8s for my crossovers. But once again, I'm limiting myself to 2-axle units and 40 and 50-foot cars. But I've seen like a number 12 crossover, pretty impressive piece, but you're talking about a switch to go from one end to the other, probably close to 2.5 to 3 feet long by the time you make that switch from main 1 to main 2, but much more prototypical looking when you've got a turnout that large. But I buy mine from Jay Criswell out in California. He sells the kits, and you can buy whatever size turnout you're looking for. He's got number 5s, number 6s, 8s, 10s, 12s, 14s. So whatever you want, he just sells the whole kit. And then you can get the templates from Fast Tracks and print those right off on your printer at home there, tape them together like I do. And I use those as my template for laying out the ties. And then it also shows you in building a switch, which might be a topic for another time, is how to build a turnout. But you start with the frog and build off the frog is what I've learned. Works the best. Now, other people might have other techniques. I'm saying it's the one and only. But I find that once you place that frog and then build off of that, the turnouts go together beautifully.
David, thank you so very much. Look forward to seeing you next month.
All right, Jim, we'll see you then.